What's up, guys? This is Mr. Eldridge, and in today's video, we're going to look at Unit 8's impact on culture. Soldiers returning home from World War II began to start families and go back into the workforce, whether they were in white-collar jobs or blue-collar jobs. And these Americans began to see a lot of prosperous activities with a renewed economy following massive production increases that continued after World War II. Married and with a job, a record number of families began to have children. This phenomenon is known as the baby boom. And housing and construction skyrocketed due to the GI Bill of Rights. This was a piece of legislation that provided returning soldiers with assistance for housing, vocational training, loans, and college. Many of these families settled in commonly modeled tractable neighborhoods known as suburbs. These neighborhoods on the outside of urban areas, and a demographic shift occurred as many moved to the sunny and opportunity-filled areas known as the Sun Belt region of the Southeast and the Southwest. The growing arms race between the Americans and the Soviets kept American markets and jobs prosperous as the military-industrial complex, this term coined by President Eisenhower to represent the continued American federal spending on military production and foreign sales, maintain Keynesian spending. 1950s also brought on the golden age of television. During the 1950s, TV spurred on shows, businesses, advertising, movies, and even rock and roll. And many felt the United States experienced one of its high points following World War II. One of those suburban areas was called the Levittown. These were several large suburban housing developments created in the United States and one in Puerto Rico by William J. Levitt. Built after World War II for returning veterans and their new families, the communities offered attractive alternates to cramped central city locations and apartments. The Veterans Administration and the Federal Housing Administration guaranteed builders that qualified veterans could buy housing for a fraction of rental costs. The first Levittown home sold for $7,900, and in a short period of time, 17,000 units were sold, providing homes for 84,000 people. In addition to normal family dwellings, Levittowns provided private meeting areas, swimming pools, public parks, and recreational facilities. Socially, the 1950s was dominated by conservative Christian culture. The nuclear family with a housewife and a working father were not just an option. They were considered the status quo. With the spread of McCarthyism and anti-communist fervor, to be anything but patriotic and supportive of American causes, such as the war in Korea and Vietnam, was considered against the status quo and produced in the media. Christianity saw a resurgence as evangelists such as Billy Graham saw a sharp rise in the period from 1945 to 1960. These evangelists used mediums such as newspapers, books, radios, TV programs, and others to preach religious salvation, American ideals, and anti-communism. Church membership and attendance doubled to 114 million from 1945 to 1960. After World War II, Congress added the phrase, quote, "In God we trust," to American currency and "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. Despite the seemingly good times experienced by middle-class Americans, society still did not offer equality of opportunity to all people in some parts of the United States. And oftentimes, the 1950s is called the affluent society. During the 1960s and 1970s, we do see a shift in this cultural movement. This growing movement began based on what would later be articulated and grown into postmodern thought. These philosophers, perplexed by the destruction of World War II and the Cold War, posed several critiques of society, including, among others, group power dynamics. The concept of group power dynamics held that all things could be reduced to power. In other words, all people act to gain arbitrary power for their groups, be it national, racial, gender, or otherwise, in a socially constructed and constraining version of reality. Society was constructed in a manner to preserve said power for the group that was in charge. In the West, the label fell on the rich, white Protestant males. Consequently, activists and students set out to change Western society for what they considered to be the better, as progressives took to the streets in protest. They criticized the religious and political systems that had been used to discriminate and sought to break down limitations and boundaries to do this. They protested, rallied, sat in, practiced civil disobedience, and advocated freedom of choice, equality, and tolerance. Despite sizable resistance coming from the conservative right, this movement was largely successful in eliminating overt systematic discrimination in the 1960s and 1970s. The New Left, a political identity spawned from the counterculture movement, essentially continued the fundamental mission started by progressives in the early 20th century. They sought, above else, social justice and acted to disassemble any institutional oppression. The New Left itself was a broad political movement, mainly in the 1960s and 1970s, consisting of activists in the Western world who campaigned for a broad range of social issues, such as civil and political rights, feminism, LGBTQ rights, abortion rights, gender roles, and drug policy reforms. The New Left was also anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-sexist, and anti-militaristic. Examples of activists that challenged the status quo at home, as well as the conservative spirit in the 1940s and 1950s, can be seen with the Berkeley Free Speech Movement in 1964. This movement opposed limits on free speech and other rights as students protested against the administration and government for infringing on their individual rights. Other examples of groups that acted out against the status quo were the Black Panthers and members of the Black Power movement that advocated using any means necessary to protect American blacks, even violence. Thank you so much for paying attention to this video. If you have not subscribed to this channel, please go ahead and do so now. Thank you so much, and have a great day.